Alright, what's up, you guys? So, obviously, we are days away from the 2026 tennis season kicking off, and of course, it has been a minute, so time to dip the toes back in, ease my way back, and thought I'd just toss myself a softball here, do a rundown on the top 10, and, even some top 20 discussion regarding the season that was. I've done this the last couple of years with, grading all of the top 10 seasons and going through what panned out and what didn't in my preseason predictions. And so that being said, let us dive into the year that was in 2025 at the top of the men's game. A cursory look at my top 10 predictions for the end of 2025 last year. And yeah, especially that top 8, pretty darn good, if I don't say so myself. Taylor Fritz really was one match win away, one more match won this year, and, I got my whole top 5 correct in the correct order. So how could you not be thrilled about that? More on those guys that I got correct later when we grade out the seasons, but let me just hit on the guys that I was incorrect about, because Fritz aside, there were 4 names here that weren't even in the top 10, and of course, within the top 10 this year, there were a couple of guys that really took us by surprise. This is going to be a really interesting talking point just because it highlights the broader theme here, a video that I tried recording a couple weeks ago, but I just wasn't satisfied about, and that regarding Tier 2. That's something that I do want to dig deeper into, but, the Cliff Notes version of it being that it's a bit of musical chairs right now at the top of the men's game, after Sinner and Alcaraz obviously off of as dominant a duopoly year as we've ever seen. I honestly, first started noticing this after DC, where Davidovich-Fokina lost, and you looked at the live ranking, and you were like, really? He's number 11 in the race right now? And yeah, right now that's just the nature of things at the moment. The 90s gen seems to be slowing down. Djokovic's 38. You don't really need to expand that much on that. A lot of your really young guys feel like they're a year away, maybe a year away from being a year away from figuring things out enough to really make their, leaps per se. And that makes it so we're in a place here where it really does just take a couple of big runs strung together, even if it's not consistent throughout the course of the year, because outside of Sinner and Alcaraz, really nobody was consistent throughout the course of the entire year. But, that makes it so otherwise you get on a hot streak for a little bit, you really can vault up the rankings right now. It's a great time right now to, really gun for some of your career best rankings for guys in Tier 2, just because there's so much volatility for all these different circumstances, whatever the reason may be. And that's really what happened here with our actual number 5. I had Fritz finishing there. It ended up being Felix Auger-Aliassime, which is definitely, I think, the biggest surprise here, because a lot of people weren't even looking at him, myself included, to return to turn. He had a pretty good January, February, even though it ended in a disappointing Australian Open loss in the most important event. And then for a stretch up until August, it was sort of more of the same of what we've seen since 2022. Sort of middling and a lot of early exits at the big events and slams, Masters. But then, after Cincinnati, it just kind of clicked. That US Open run was utterly sensational in many ways. Probably his best ever slam run as far as who he beat and how he did it. Outside of the De Minaur match where, he had his off day, but he just competed really well and played the bigger points a lot better. He was dominant outside of that match. He played exceptionally well to get to that semifinal, and I think you could even take a little bit of a moral victory in the fact that, he didn't get blown out by Jannik Sinner. He very much was in that match, and it just speaks to the baseline foundation weapons of his game and how strong they are, how, damaging they can be against anybody in this sport. It makes for why he was such a heralded prospect early in his career. He just has these innate gifts that are available to him in ways that guys that are in that same age bracket and more accomplished than him, they just can't do some of the things that he can as easily. And that's why people like me, I've long rooted for Felix Auger-Aliassime, taking note of him since he was a literal child tearing it up on the Challenger circuit. But at age 25, still relatively young, you still hold out hope that, given his innate gifts, maybe somewhere down the line, in sort of a Stan Wawrinka type way, not to say that it'll explode to like that extent, but you do hope that maybe someday, given these incremental steps he's taking, that full potential is unlocked somewhere down the line, even if later than expected. And in that sense, 2025, I think, was a huge stepping stone for him. And when the dust settled, valiant effort, and you look ahead and it's like, it's Felix's best time of the year. He's back indoors down the home stretch of 2025, and all of a sudden, you're like, he's really well positioned to finish in Turin. But not only did he do that, he continued on what was probably the most consistent stretch of his career from Cincinnati through the end of this season. Handful of top 10 victories, and again, played Sinner tougher than most. When you look at the Bercy final, making it to the Bercy final, and then once he got to Turin off the back of those strong runs, winning Brussels, quarters, I think, in Shanghai, and then final in Bercy, he didn't just stand pat on getting there. He knocks off 2 more top 8 players there in Shelton, and then Zverev in the winner-take-all to make the semifinals. And with those results, all of a sudden you look up, and he ends the year number 5 in the world. That's something I know was on nobody's bingo card. And the pros certainly are, I think, again, most consistent stretch of his career. I think even though the weaknesses still certainly are there, the backhand still for stretches can go completely off the rails, even though we saw less of that down the stretch of this season. But yeah, I just think, a lot more clarity, a lot better situationally. He still found himself in a lot of tight matches against the guys ranked underneath him, but whereas he was losing a lot of deciding set matches over the last couple of years, a couple of 2-set to love leads blown actually, I definitely thought there was a layer of toughness there that was bolstered, maybe just by virtue of confidence being a little bit healthier than he has within the last 2 years this season. I don't think this is a situation where he's completely set it right in terms of the volatility. I think that is still there, but it's baby steps. He's making progress for sure. I think even technically you could say this is probably the most stability he has had, even though that's not been completely erased. We will see if it's here to stay, but how could you not be happy for him? I mean, what a close to a year in 2025 for Felix Auger-Aliassime. And then getting to my other misses, number 6, where Fritz actually finished, I had Medvedev. And yeah, it felt like a make-or-break season for Daniil going into 2025, right? Off a real dismal, in particular, like post-Wimbledon stretch in 2024, where health also was a big problem, particularly with his shoulder. And I don't know, this year it was kind of backwards, because I feel like, relatively speaking, Medvedev had more of a clean bill of health this season than the last 2 years where he was dealing with the shoulder, and last year where he had a real concerning stretch post-Wimbledon. The slam results still kept his ranking afloat. They were pretty good last year. This year, in what is probably my stat of the season, which is just unbelievable, as Medvedev goes through all 4 slams playing and wins 1 match across the 4 majors. That is just mind-blowing. Of course, at a point this season, he dropped out of the top 20, hit probably rock bottom after the US Open and the entire North American hardcourt swing, which was an utter disaster, start to finish. And I like Daniil, so, the way that the year finished with the fall, I've, looked over the year and tried to spin it in a way where It's like after the US Open, it felt like he came back up for air again. And hey, I mean, outside of the majors, he wasn't that bad outside of the North American hardcourt swing. Like, he had that Indian Wells semi-run. Honestly, like a fine clay court season. Nothing great, nothing awful either. Made the final in Halle as well. And then in the fall, finally broke that 2+ year title drought and a stronger run of results. But then you think to yourself, like, what are we talking about here? What do you mean outside of the majors? Like, one major win is not just something you can just sweep under the carpet, especially given, the trend with Medvedev over the last year and a half. But hey, I guess it's good, to end on a high, especially after clearing out, his team, getting new voices in the camp, swapping out, like, the only guy we've known him, have as a coach in Gilles Savara for Thomas Johansson, who's been around the block. I can see both worlds where, the strong end to 25 carries over into 26. I could also totally see the end to 25 being a bit of a mirage. It's every bit, if not more, of a prove-it stretch upcoming for Medvedev as it was this time a year ago. Number 8, I had Holger returning to the top 8 mix. Obviously, first and foremost, the worst part about his season is the way that it ended. Haven't really seen that many Achilles tears in tennis, but obviously they have been prevalent in a sport I also enjoy a lot in the NBA. And even a decade ago, the Achilles was like the worst injury possible in basketball. It seemed to be like a death note for those who suffered from it, but modern medicine, recovery, seem to be making a lot of progress in successful Achilles returns. Certainly you hope Holger's recovery from that injury mimics one of like a Kevin Durant, where we can just get back on the wagon and not have to lament, what could have been. But regarding his year, I do think in 2025 the highs were better than they were in 2024, but they still aren't enough for me to say that it wasn't a disappointing season for him even before getting injured. You're still seeing the overarching theme that I talk about with Felix Dimitrov in the past. I still see a guy there that isn't 100% sure how he wants to play, isn't completely committed on an identity from match to match. And I think that does play a part here in why even the good results, one result isn't indicative of what's going to follow. And for Holger, I've always sort of observed that I think, he's a great clutch performer. When the back is to the wall, it seems like a lot of that fog goes out the window, just plays on instinct, and he usually is just a dog in pressure situations. But in this stretch, I also feel like that has waned a little bit. Maybe it's a matter of no longer being the new kid on the block, having that element of surprise. Whatever the case, he's faltering more there as well. And yeah, I mean, the fitness problems still regarding endurance loom large. And of course, first and foremost, you just hope that he successfully recovers from this major injury and then give himself a chance to potentially sort that out. He's still relatively young, still time to get there, and I guess glass half full. You can take solace in the fact that even in these down years, like, his floor as a 22-year-old is still like a bona fide top 15 player. There were still nice moments, like, I thought he had a good AO. Made the Indian Wells finals, a couple good wins there. Alcaraz's sole loss on clay this year came at his hands. Wasn't the year I envisioned for him, but for now, you just gotta wish him all the best in recovery and hope he comes back when he's right again. It's pretty funny looking down my misses after Fritz. All of these guys, Medvedev, Rune, Rublev, 7 spots lower than I projected. And yeah, I mean, there were misses enough with Medvedev, Rune, but I don't feel as, bad about it as Rublev, because honestly, finishing 16 for Rublev this year feels better than the year actually was. It was more of the same of what we thought maybe was a one-off in the funk that Rublev was in after Dubai last year. sending him a bit off the rails mentally for the rest of the season. Still found a way to claw his way into Turin again. But this year, you had more of the same without the one explosive run. Last year was Madrid. This year, just pretty clear cut. And I don't know, like, at least I can feel good about the fact that I felt like Rublev would finally miss out on Turin. At least I had him going backwards somewhat. But it was definitely a lot worse than expected. Really, all you have to write home about this season is that Doha title and playing Alcaraz well, twice over the summer at Wimbledon and Cincinnati. Other than that, like, he leaves this year, and I don't really understand why, but clearly a lesser version of himself the last 2 years. Just not as potent as we've become accustomed to offensively. Very, very upset prone. We'll see if this is just the new norm as it's been for the better part of 2 years, or if there's a bounce back in store. But then, last miss, Tommy Paul finished number 20. I think he's still in the midst of his prime, honestly. I think this was just a very injury-plagued year. Thankfully for Tommy, he was able to at least achieve that top 10 spot at the beginning of this season. And yeah, really till Roland Garros, he was performing up to that ranking. Very much a guy right now in the thick of his prime. It was just very unfortunate at Roland Garros. That injury just totally derailed that momentum. In Australia, he had Zverev on the ropes for a good portion of that 4-set loss. Of course, made another semifinal in Rome for the second year running, quarterfinal at Roland Garros, but ends up getting injured between those two 5-set battles with Fucsovics and Khachanov back-to-back. Has nothing left for Alcaraz in the quarterfinals. And then really, aside from playing two of the most entertaining matches of the year against Borges and Bublik at the US Open, not really anything of note the rest of the season, courtesy of never really getting healthy. I mean, it was an injury-plagued second half, dealt with all types of injuries from the ab to the foot, shut down the season after the US Open pretty much. Hopefully that's enough time now to get right for 2026 and keep on the really productive run it's been for him since 2023. If so, I expect him to be right back in that, fringe top 10 mix. And with that, yeah, if you've been a long-time subscriber of this channel, you know how hard it is for me to be concise. But over 15 minutes in, here it is, the namesake of this video, grading the top 10. I'm pretty sure I said it before at some point this season, but I do feel like pretty clearly this is the weakest top 10 that I have ever experienced watching tennis. It's not really even the names. It's like these are the same names as prior years in many ways, and a couple of new ones, but in prior years, a lot of those dudes were in better form, much better form, healthier. Obviously, a lot of injuries as well had roles here to play in that, which often is the case when you have that conversation. I mean, like, I would probably say before this year, you take like the second half of 2017 is the only thing I'd say was comparable, where so many of these mainstays in those spots just completely fell apart health-wise. And yeah, for that reason, there's plenty of reason to think there'll be an uptick. It won't stay this way in 2026. You would just assume better health. The young fellows making more gains over the course of the month-long off-season. A lot of reason to just think that, this can change in a hurry, but that does make doing these grades a whole lot more intriguing. But yeah, with that being said, start up top, your world number one, Carlos Alcaraz. A+, need I say more? There were so many gains this year for Alcaraz that go beyond just the title haul, the winning streaks and whatnot. I mean, first off, there's a lot to be proud of because it felt like the beginning of this year there was some spillover from how he ended 2024 post the Olympics. For his standards, even in the time that Jannik Sinner was out of commission for the suspension, his quarter one of the season felt underwhelming. I mean, it was as off mentally as we've ever seen him. which had continued from post the Olympics loss last year. Against the compromised Djokovic in Australia, he blinked, didn't kill Djokovic off when he had the chance, and honestly played a little bit scared, I felt like, for a portion of that match until it was too late. And then, in best of three, also let go of a couple matches it seemed like he had bagged in the spring, and all of a sudden we're going into clay court season, and it's like, really? He only has Rotterdam right now? But it was really cool to just see all of the tweaks that we had seen from day one of this season and how they evolved throughout the course of the year, because he was still playing scratchy tennis through much of the clay court season, but you collectively saw everybody see what happened in that Monte Carlo match against Beatz. Even Alcaraz has acknowledged how important that one was, and people on his team as well. Even if we still hadn't gotten Apex Alcaraz, that one, definitely seemed to toughen him back up in Monte Carlo, and he never looked back. Would go on to play the final of every event he was in until October at the Paris Masters. In that time, picking up the 8 titles, 3 Masters 1000s, 2 slams at Roland Garros and the US Open. And I've sort of touched on this before. Like, we saw throughout the course of the year the work and intent that he had put into all these different technical aspects of his game. They each started taking shape as the year went on. I think from Rome on, you saw the new look ground strokes with the shorter takebacks on both wings, really just hit their stride and lock back into place, as dynamic as ever, less rushable than ever. Obviously, the mental vulnerability there for a couple of months after the Olympics final, a thing clearly of the past for him to be able to pull off what he did in the Roland Garros final. Just living on a knife's edge, having to be at his very best, with the back completely to the wall over the last 3 sets of that match, and then producing one of the great flurries to finish a match that you will ever see 5+ hours into that final. And then grass season, for whatever reason, the A game never showed up other than maybe a couple matches in Queens. But you see his serve improvements carry the day there, and still see him win the title in Queens, go to the Wimbledon final, and you feel like after Sinner gets him back, maybe that blunted the blow that he had dealt winning that RG final in such unbelievable fashion, going to the hard courts. And where in prior years he was more gettable on a fast hard court than anywhere else, I think the remainder of the season on largely quick hard courts, all of these improvements came to the forefront more than ever. It seemed like he got the most comfortable that he was at any point in the season from here till the end. And in particular, from like the Cincinnati semifinal through to Turin, honestly, with the exception of the Paris Masters, one clunker in there, but otherwise, it was just everything. The improved serve, the compacted ground strokes, was just working on full cylinders. He basically, with his compacted ground strokes, took away the plan A game plan against him for opponents, and did it without losing any of the teeth or flair or box office factor in his game. It wasn't at the cost of anything. He just became a more effective, lethal tennis player. And you talk about the US Open, probably the best single tournament of his career to this point. Tokyo was lights out, even Turin. These are all some of the quickest hard courts in the sport right now. And you could argue he looked the best he ever did this year in such a great season in those conditions. So overall, monumental year for Carlos Alcaraz. A lot to be proud of, a lot of great strides made. Great resolve to turn it around the way that he did, and probably the first of many all-time great Carlos Alcaraz seasons to come. And then with your world number 2, Jannik Sinner. I'm also giving Sinner's 25 an A+. I am firmly of the belief that any year that you win multiple slams, I feel like that can't grade any lower than like an A, maybe A minus in like one or two cases historically, and Sinner 2025 certainly is not that. I initially grappled with giving this an A, and then I thought to myself, like, why would I do that? In many ways, this was a historic year in and of itself for him. I mean, going to all 4 Slam finals, sensational. Another year with the 90+% winning percentage for the season. The first of its kind, I believe, year of leading the tour in hold and break percentage. First of its kind, at least since the stats started being tracked in the early 90s. And yeah, it's backed up watching him too. I mean, he looks like a better player than he was a year ago. He made a huge leap on both natural surfaces. I obviously had my questions about him on clay, and they were emphatically answered immediately at that. Like, the dude cold off the couch, looked a little bit rusty, went to the finals in Rome anyways, lost to the best player on clay of the season, and then less than a month later, that gap is completely bridged, and he's playing maybe his best tournament of the entire year on clay at Roland Garros, even though that tournament ended in a losing effort. He just looked irresistible throughout the entire tournament. And like his counterpart in Alcaraz, like, the surface of it sort of faded to the backdrop. And of course, after sustaining like as devastating a loss as you can draw up for Sinner, he just remains Teflon, really, mentally. I mean, nothing external has really ever mattered for him. He handled his leap into superstardom without missing a beat. None of the doping noise nor the actual 3-month period of inactivity this year derailed him at all when he returned to the court, and then just bounced back like it was nothing from one of the most devastating losses that's ever been taken probably in modern tennis history, winning the very next slam against the same guy he sustained that loss against. I mean, it's just so impressive, and he's a serial improver. You just never know when he's going to like shapeshift into his next iteration. Like, you take the summer after Wimbledon, and he's struggling in Cincinnati in the US Open with his serve. And then he props up a couple weeks later. Post-US Open swing has just become a formality. Sinner's just time to dominate. With the roof over his head, he's just a buzzsaw. And yeah, a couple weeks after that US Open final, he props up in Asia, goes to Europe, posts some of the best serving numbers of his career. And yeah, what stood out this year to me is, like, this dude has one of the highest floors, I think, in tennis history. The off days hardly come at all because, yeah, I mean, the way the modern game is played, he is just perfect. He is literally built in a lab in this day and age where tennis is just played so big and really predicated on shoring up any weakness possible. He is the ultimate version of that blueprint. And so many of these dudes just go up against him and realize he just does our plan A so much better than us. And that's why you have to do all these other little things to try disrupting him and get him off that just regulation game that he can beat anybody in the world at and is going to beat anyone in the world at most times. And realistically, most guys just don't have that skill set, or if they do, it's the older guys that don't have the youth or the body to sustain it, which realistically just leaves you with Carlos, and nobody has the skill set he has. So yeah, I mean, if you're trying to poke holes in Sinner's year, I'm thinking about it and it's like, yeah, he still lost to Alcaraz at the big ones more often than not, and whether rightfully, wrongfully, however you feel about his suspension, the reality of it is it happening. He just wasn't available enough to win more than like one Masters 1000. But then the flip side is he still beat Alcaraz at a major final. And sure, he lost some cracks at a couple extra Masters 1000s to get more than one, which he got at the Paris Masters. But then he still ended up winning the World Tour Finals at the end of the year. So I really cannot knock this year. I feel like anything less than like an A would be nitpicky. And yeah, I'm going to go all the way up to A+, because I do feel like he got better, and the stats back that up. And then moving on to our number 3, obviously a steep drop-off from the top 2. This has been apparent since clay court season. But in regards to the name holding this number 3 spot, Alexander Zverev, one of the weakest, I think, top 3 world number 3 seasons that we have ever seen. And again, it's not an issue of Alexander Zverev being ranked there. He's, of course, been ranked there, in and around there, for the better part of a decade. He's been as good of one of those tier 2 players as can possibly be, and at times he's scaled up into a quasi tier 1 guy. In fact, that's where he ended up just this time last year. But, you know, looking past just the surface level win tally, he made another slam final, ends world number 3, putting this year under the slightest bit of scrutiny. Digging a little bit deeper, it was poor. And Zverev echoed those sentiments himself throughout the course of his own season this year. For a while, you know, you could give the pass of he was just super deflated after an Australian Open that everybody, including himself, thought he had a decent chance of putting up a fight in, and getting blown out in that one just, you know, seemed to rub salt in the wound for just all the misery that Zverev's had at the majors, and really tackling the last obstacle that's there for him is to win that slam. But then as the year progressed, he was a lot more banged up than we're used to. He's been really an Iron Man, aside from that one like traumatic injury at Roland Garros in 2022. But the thing is, this year, it felt like he became the furthest away from doing that he has been since he was a teenager to early 20s. And the thing with him has always been, you know, even if he's not going to be winning majors, the availability has always been there. The volume of tournaments he plays every year has always been there. But the difference was he just very rarely went out early in them. And especially when you talk about best of 3, he was live and often did get scalps off of pretty much anybody on tour. Whereas this year, you know, you saw a whole lot more early exits, and more importantly, there's a glaring lack of quality wins from this 2025 season for Zverev. I would argue his most impressive result all year was that Vienna final, pushing Sinner to the brink. But even when you consider the few bright spots like that final and the Munich title, which he was very close to being titleless, if you remember Talon Griekspoor for the match to win in straights against him in the quarters or semis there. But all that being said, it never really amounted to him picking up any sort of momentum. So when you roll together everything, him getting injured more, forget punching up to the tier 1 guys like he has in the past, him slipping a lot, as far as the upper hand that we've been used to him having, beating those below him with a regularity that we've become accustomed to. It's really giving very 2024 Medvedev-esque vibes, where you're wondering if this is indicative of him slowing down here, or if you can just chalk it up as a down year. Whatever the case may be, like a year ago for Medvedev, it feels like a prove-it year for Alexander Zverev in 2026. His 2025, though, has to go down as like a C. As for 2025, Novak Djokovic played a fraction of the tournaments of just about everybody else in the upper echelon of men's tennis. And of course, the main headline for his season is the 4 semis at the 4 majors. A stunning feat, any way that you slice it. A definite upgrade as far as his performance at the slams, in the quality of his play from last year. But ultimately, we are in the same place, I think, as far as the phase of his career where we're in as a year ago, where when you compare him to himself, are these the most elite versions of Novak Djokovic? You would say absolutely not, but I do still think, you know, on occasion for a handful of matches, tournaments maybe even, he can still summon it. Obviously, it's not as automatic. You can't just call on that. But yeah, I mean, in 2025, those first two slams of the season, I thought he was excellent in Australia and Roland Garros. And he's continuing to make the best of what he can with the physical tools that are available to him, that are diminished, obviously, from prior years. Everything we've seen from him and how he's transformed throughout the course of the first half of this decade in the 2020s has still been there. From now, needing his serve to be elite and it being able to deliver a more aggressive intent on the forehand, the soft skills improving up at net. That's all there, and that's why he's sort of in no man's land, where with the tennis of things, he's doing everything right. He is maximizing with what he has at his disposal and the body he has at 38 going on 39, and that's enough still to be better than everybody else in tennis, and honestly comfortably so, other than the generational 22 and 24 year olds, which he should be. And it does feel weird because we haven't really been in a world since the 2000s where there's multiple guys that on their day you will take over Novak Djokovic in the tennis world right now, but that is the case, and those two guys will continue getting better, and as Djokovic gets older, it'll be harder and harder for him to stay in striking distance with those two. And this year what became more of a factor than ever was, even if not the major injuries like the MCL tear last year, but at this age he's obviously still more prone to picking up the little niggles, nicks, and bruises that add up. And yeah, naturally, at 38, you can't play as much. You probably don't want to play as much. That's become apparent as well outside the slams. Can't train as hard, and that's where you get a picture where at one point this year, the events that he played were only the last three slams of the year, with Roland Garros, Wimbledon, US Open consecutively. And I think definitely in the latter two, Wimbledon, he just gets unlucky, end of that Kaboli match, and picks up an injury and never has a chance in the semis. Which to me, the chance was minute in the Sinner matchup anyways at this point, but he never even had a chance. And then the US Open, he's just undercooked. So you really just start seeing luck having to take shape for Djokovic here, where you need your own body to cooperate here, but also you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't from how you schedule, because you risk being undercooked, not as match tough, playing as little as he did, as sparsely as he did, but at the same time, if you are going to play more, you run the risk, of course, of overplaying and getting injured that way. And at that point, for his aspirations still, when it comes to winning the biggest prizes in the sports and challenging the heavyweights, at his age, there's not really, a rationale or science behind it. Some luck is definitely going to have to be at play, but when you look at this season as a whole, there's really only one other precedent in 2019, Roger Federer, and moving forward, he's going to be going into uncharted territory. Obviously, for the standards of people at this age in any sport, this would be a slam dunk, but it's Novak Djokovic. It's just another little nice feather in the cap. I'll give his 2025 a B+. At number 5, I'll be quick with this one. Already talked about Felix's season. Ends it probably with the most consistent stretch of his career. The highlight being a US Open where at certain portions of the tournament he was just straight breathing fire on a tennis court. I would love for that to be the start of him showing something a little bit more on outdoor hard courts. We know what he is indoors. He's one of the best players in the world. Bona fide, proven commodity there. Even with that most consistent stretch of his career to close the year, I could totally see it going either way for him next year. But I mean, the consistency, the big wins, an added layer of maturity, being in a good place, of course, mentally, getting married this year. It does feel like an added layer of legitimacy to a run like that, as opposed to how he ended 2022. If he can keep that going without a roof over his head, then no question that upward trajectory should continue. His season, a lot of mediocrity up until August. It's like a kid that was like a C student throughout the entire school year and then just absolutely aced finals week. which ends up salvaging the final grade. And to his credit, that number next to his name at number 5 was well earned. I think that stretch was good enough to validate it, especially relative to a field that wasn't exactly lighting the world on fire in the time when he was struggling. So I give his 2025 a solid B. But before we get out of here, I do want to talk about the tragic news we got on Tuesday, especially given it hit us here in the online tennis space. The passing of one Damian Kust at just age 26 to what had been disclosed as a rare autoimmune disease. Obviously, the online tennis community, at least relative to other sports, it feels a little bit more intimate, a little smaller. So I do feel like there's a little bit more ease in that sense to gain some familiarity with a lot of people that contribute content, create these platforms through that form. And I never got the privilege to really interact with Damian, but I did pretty religiously used to read his articles on Last Word on Sports. He was a very regular contributor, writer on that website. Pretty much damn near every day, every tournament, he was writing predictions prior to each day of action. You can imagine, being so regular with that, how informed, how passionate about tennis that you have to be. And I know that his presence permeated beyond that with the Iga Carlos podcast he did as well. Obviously, an amazing follow on Twitter as well. He was probably the most dialed in the entire community with the Challenger Tour, and that was honestly always a great opportunity to learn, whether it be up-and-coming talent or just players that wouldn't have the spotlight shown on them otherwise. Goes without saying, that was a guy that had found his calling in life. Seemed like a stand-up dude as well, always willing to interact with those that just wanted to chop it up on tennis. And even some friends of mine that, are deep into college tennis, challenger tennis, were thrilled with being able to converse with him on that on social media. Always a gut punch to hear about something like this, especially for somebody so young. But just based off of the outpour of condolences and anecdotes from those that got to know him, those like me that were big enjoyers of his content, fellow content creators, media, even up to some, pro players as well. I saw like Seb Korda, Marin Cilic. Just goes to show, how far-reaching, how impactful his work and really his presence was, even if cut short. I saw earlier today that Damian's family was imploring people to donate to a foundation tied to helping people with the type of illness that he had, so I will link that in the description here. Heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of Damian Kust, gone entirely way too soon, and may he rest in peace.